So it's truly my privilege to introduce our speaker this morning. Senator Duckworth earned a master's degree in international relations from George Washington University, moved to Illinois to pursue a PhD in political science, worked for Rotary International. She joined the Illinois Army National Guard and was trained as a Black Hawk helicopter pilot. I was in the Army, but they never would trust me with it. In 2004, she was deployed to Iraq, and on November 12th, her helicopter was hit by an RPG. As a result, she lost her legs and partial use of her right arm. She spent the next year recovering at Walter Reed Medical Center, where she quickly became an advocate for her fellow soldiers. She retired from the Guard in 2014 at the rank of Lieutenant Colonel and a Purple Heart recipient. After she recovered from her injuries, she became the director of the Illinois Department of Veterans Affairs, helped create a tax credit for employees that hire veterans, developed a 24/7 crisis hotline, and developed programs to improve veterans' access to housing. In 2009, President Obama appointed her as an Assistant Secretary of Veterans Affairs, where she worked to address veterans' homelessness, created the Office of Online Communications, and worked to address unique challenges faced by female and Native American veterans. In 2012, she was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives from the 8th Congressional District, served 2 terms. She was then elected to the U.S. Senate in 2016 and re-elected in 2020. She serves on the Armed Services, Environment and Public Works, Commerce, Science and Transportation, and Small Business and Entrepreneurship Committees. She founded the Senate's Environmental Justice Caucus and has been ranked a highly effective lawmaker. I know from speaking with Champaign-Urbana officials that they are very thankful for her strong support for critical local projects. And I'm sure this is true across the state. But I'm particularly proud of the fact that she's helped fund the high-tech mapping of the Muhammad Aquifer, the sole source aquifer for nearly a million people in central Illinois. Now she could only get her congressional colleagues to adopt the Rotary's 4-way test. To this date, the Senator volunteers at local food pantries, participates in community service projects. In her free time, she and her husband, Brian, are proud parents of 2 daughters. I'm sure that you agree that Senator Duckworth truly embodies Rotary's service above self. Please give her a Rotary welcome, our Senator, Tammy Duckworth.
Oh my goodness, thank you.
Senator Duckworth, my emotions are running pretty high today because I'm in awe that I'm sitting next to someone who is so important. It's like sitting next to a movie star. But on the other hand, I have read your memoir and listened to it several times.
Oh dear, there's a lot of profanity in it.
And I feel like I know so many intimate details about your life that I'm sitting with a friend. We are so honored that you are here today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me here. I'm thrilled. I never say no. Okay, now y'all are gonna know, but I never say no to an invite from a Rotary Club. As a former RI staffer, I am thrilled to be here.
Well, since you did work for Rotary for 3 years, tell us why you were selected for that position and what it was like working for Rotary.
Oh my gosh, I loved working for Rotary. So I was working on my PhD at Northern Illinois University, and when I saw an ad in the newspaper for this organization that I didn't know anything about, but they were looking for someone to be the manager for club and district administration in charge of the entire Asia Pacific region. But the key thing was they wanted somebody who could speak some of the local languages, including Thai, Indonesian, Tagalog, and I speak both Thai and Indonesian. I'm like, okay, I'll apply for this job, and I got it. I will tell you, I loved my time at Rotary, and I still consider myself a Rotary staffer. My job was to assist club and districts in interpreting and implementing Rotary's bylaws and Rotary's constitution. I attended all the training events, worked at the Rotary conventions, attended district conferences, and I had some really interesting and funny experiences as an RI staffer. The family of Rotary worldwide is one that I always admire, because I was like, these are people who voluntarily join a club that forces them to pay dues so that they can do service projects for other people. And then they get fined all throughout the year for like miscellaneous things in order to raise more funds, in order to do more service projects. And I'm like, I like these people. And so I loved my time at Rotary, and I traveled all throughout. So my area was all the Asia Pacific countries, and then also RIBI, I don't know why, maybe because it's an island. And then I served as the staff director for the committee on opening Rotary and non-Rotary countries. And I was very fortunate to help open the Rotary Club in Timor-Leste, get the 2 initial Rotary clubs in the PRC, and also reopen the Rotary Club of Kabul after it had been shut down in the early 70s, and put the first female president in place there.
How wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, for many years, Rotary diversified its membership by restricting the number of professions represented in clubs to 10% for each profession. And then women later were allowed to join Rotary in 1989. But how can Rotary continue to diversify its membership?
I think it's opening the doors to folks that you might not think of traditionally as Rotarians, but it's also about getting future Rotarians in the pipeline, getting those young people into all of the young Rotary programs, because they grow up knowing and understanding this idea of the 4-way test, the idea of service, and it becomes a part of their lives. I grew up, with a father who was a veteran. I come from a military family, and I was always taught this amazing nation is precious, and democracy is precious, and we must serve in some way. And I never thought I would join the military. I thought I would join the Foreign Service. But in my family, it was like, you need to serve. You need to do something to give back to this nation for all of the wealth and all the opportunities that are there for you. And I think by opening the pipeline and really encouraging more young people to enter the pipeline of Rotary, they learn, it becomes part of their everyday lives, that you know what, service is important. Service is what is going to make me fulfilled and happy and part of what I want to be as a grown-up, as an adult.
Thank you. Why did you become a combat pilot when you went into the Army?
Well, I thought I was going to become a linguist, actually. But when I was at the end of your junior year of training, you sit down and you have to tell the Army what jobs you want, and you rank order all the jobs from first choice to 13th choice. And I was the only female in my ROTC unit. And the instructor said, okay, men, doesn't matter what your major is in college. You could be an accounting major and you want to become a finance officer, but your top 5 choices, 3 must be combat jobs: infantry, artillery, armor, that sort of thing. It doesn't matter. It's really needs of the Army, whatever the country and the Army needs you to do. And then he looked at me and goes, except for Duckworth, she's female. Females can't serve in combat. You put down all non-combat jobs. And at the time I thought, wow, this is really unfair to the guys. I don't want to go, nobody wants to go to combat, no soldier wants to go to combat, but I just thought, I'm going to have equal rank and equal pay, but I'm not going to face equal risk. So I asked what jobs might potentially be open for women to serve in combat, and at the time, in 1993, we would just talk about opening up pilot jobs. So the Air Force had just opened their pilot positions, and they said probably helicopter pilot. So I put that down as my #1 choice. And then I took the aptitude test and scored off the charts for it. And so that's how I became a helicopter pilot. But it was, you know what, it was the best time of my life. I loved it. Every day I just thought, I can't believe the Army pays me to do this. It was a lot of fun, and I got lots of really good stories. I'll tell you one quick Rotary story. So Rotarians are everywhere. And as an RI staffer deployed to Iraq, I was the assistant operations officer that ran the flight operations, and I was the battle captain. And so anybody that needed a ride anywhere in theater would come by and say, hey, do you have an aircraft that's going to Taji or going to Baghdad or going to wherever? And if you do, then sometimes the people would hop a ride to get there. So lots of people were coming through, lots of people were coming asking us to fly missions for them and the like. And I had my RI flag, my little Rotary flag at my duty position, like that. The number of Rotarians who were reservists or National Guardsmen who came through, who saw that flag and asked me, can you give me a makeup? Is ridiculous. It's ridiculous. Like, Rotarians are determined to get their makeup. Like in the middle of a combat zone, insurgents are shooting at us. We're just trying to find Saddam Hussein in a hole in the ground, and Rotarians are asking me for makeup. So you know what? I gave it to them. I'm not a woman secretary, but there are all these like makeup strips out there with my name on them. Like, yeah, sure, go ahead. Here's an extra one.
Well, Senator Duckworth, you'll be happy to know that RI has done away with the attendance requirements and is much more flexible today than it was back then. Now, you began advocating for veterans when you were a patient in Walter Reed. Is that what led you to run for the House of Representatives and later the Senate?
It is. When I was at Walter Reed, I happened to be for about 6 months the highest ranking amputee patient there. I was wounded at 36. They had not had anybody above the age of 24 survive my type of injuries because they were so egregious and so severe. And so I just happened to be further along in my career. My military career was 12 years in. Than the young folks, because all the young folks, the people who were getting injured that were surviving were 18, 19, 20. And so I ended up being the highest ranking amputee patient. And we had, while the healthcare at Walter Reed was absolutely beyond the best, the problem was the country thought we would only be at war for a couple of weeks and did not realize that we were going to have all of these wounded come home who were going to need healthcare for a very long time. So the administrative stuff wasn't there. Buildings had been shut down because Walter Reed was on the base closure list, but was never reopened, was never taken off the base closures list during this entire time. And so I started advocating for my fellow veterans because I just knew how to work the bureaucracy. And it really started with my husband because my husband, also a military service member, came out and was waiting outside. I went into surgery every other day for months. And he was waiting outside the surgery suite, waiting on me to come out into recovery, when he saw this young woman who was about 20, 21, and she had a little baby with him, and she was crying. And he said, well, what's wrong? And he said, well, my husband has been unconscious for 7 months in a coma, and the Army thought that he was in combat, so he got combat pay every month, at the time $200 for hostile fire pay. And they realized he was safe at Walter Reed for 7 months, so they took all his pay back. And she hadn't gotten a paycheck. And she was behind on her mortgage for the trailer at Fort Hood, Texas. She had no money for diapers and no formula. And this was a complete failure of the bureaucracy. And I keep trying to go to finance and accounting, and they just say, well, this is just the way it is. And my husband said, no, the first no is not the first no. You just keep working the system. So he and I started advocating, and then Senator Durbin came through. There were 2 Illinois service members at the time. And he very foolishly realized, thinking there was only 2 Illinois service members, gave me his business card and thinking he was only going to have to take care of 2 Illinois service members. I said, here's my personal cell phone number, telephone number. Call me if there are any problems. I promptly abused that privilege and called him all the time. And Dick Durbin, regardless of where the troop was, what part of the country he came from, would solve the problem. And he became the unofficial ombudsman for the wounded at Walter Reed. And so after about 9-10 months of this, he called me up and said, you need to run for Congress. And I said to him, you know I'm still medicated, right? I'm still hooked up to IVs and painkillers. Are you sure? And he said, no, because we need somebody in Congress who understands what our troops are going through. And there's no better person than someone who's already advocating for it. And I ran and lost. And then President Obama asked me to go to Washington, and that's when I decided to run again. But it was that determination of, it really was thrust upon me just by nature of being the oldest, highest ranking amputee.
You were a member of the United States, you are a member of the United States Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Could you tell us about the work you've been doing to strengthen the United States ties in Southeast Asia?
Yeah, so we have sort of taken our eyes off of the Asia Pacific region and looked really to Central Asia, Iraq, Afghanistan, the Middle East. But really where the competition is globally in the near future and into the next century is going to be in the Indo-Pacific with the PRC, a rising power, but a real adversary, to the United States. It's an authoritarian regime. It does not respect their own people. I mean, the people who suffer the most with the PRC communist government are the Chinese people themselves who are oppressed. But they come in and they have used very underhanded methods of building relationships in the Indo-Pacific region. And we, because we've been focused in the Middle East, have allowed those traditional alliances and relationships to atrophy. And so really pushing to go. So what the Chinese would do, for example, they'll come in and say, we're going to loan you money to build a new port in your country. And then what happens is that country falls into a debt trap, and they cannot possibly pay back the loans that they've gotten from the Chinese government. And so then the Chinese government comes in and takes control of that port. And this is happening all over Southeast Asia. And so my job on the, what I focus on in the Foreign Relations Committee is coming in and showing what doing business with America is like, that we respect the rule of law, you're going to be treated equally, that we are friends and allies is what we're looking for. We're looking to uphold international law and order, freedom of navigation. The Chinese have come in and built artificial islands in the middle of the South China Sea and then claim the territory around it as theirs, going into the territorial waters of a lot of these countries. And it's really interesting because, my work at Rotary sort of got me set up for this in a way because I learned to listen to other people who you may think speak the same language as you, but sometimes you misinterpret one another and you have to get to the heart of what they're trying to say. So really listening to what folks are saying and trying to build those relationships. I sat down in August with the new President Marcos of the Philippines, and he's very concerned about his territorial waters and trying to get him to work on with Japanese companies to build electronic vehicle batteries for the American market so we could get an EV manufacturer here in Illinois for Rivian. But when I was at Rotary, I really learned this because in being in charge of all of the Rotary clubs in the Asia Pacific region, I would get emails overnight from Rotarians in India, for example, who speak English, and they would email me in English, and they would ask me to interpret the Rotary Constitution and bylaws, and I would get questions about membership. Should we open 2 Rotary clubs? We have 40 people. Should we open 2 clubs and get credit for 2 clubs? New clubs, or do we do 1 club with 40 people and it'd be more effective? All that sort of stuff. And one time I remember I got a letter from a Rotary club in India that, in beautiful British English, said, we've had a Rotarian who has been is under investigation for embezzlement in his business, and basically what they wanted to do was know what the procedure was to expel him from the club. But the email that I got is like, this person has not lived up to the 4-way test. He's embarrassed our Rotary Club. We are incensed. The club is up. And we want to dismember him. And I wrote back, sounds a little harsh. There's nothing in the Rotarian that's symbolic of dismembering Rotarians, but perhaps what you mean is you want to expel them from your club. And I had to wait 12 hours for them to reply, yes, that's what we mean. So you gotta listen to the intent and not so much the language. And sometimes, you may speak the same language when you talk past each other. They may not actually dismember him.
This has been such a joy to have you here and listen to your wonderful answers and the story of your life. And I have a little gift for you. I know you're not supposed to take gifts, but having read your book, I know all your favorite snacks. And I actually gather some snacks for you.
Thank you. Well, I really just want to say how grateful I am to be here. I love Rotary, and having traveled all over, I speak to Rotary clubs all around the world. And again, this is, speaking to the discussion earlier today, this is about bringing hope to the world. I'm just going to tell one last story, then I'll shut up. But when we opened the Rotary Club in Afghanistan, in Kabul, right after the initial invasion, that Rotary Club became the way to get aid, humanitarian aid into Afghanistan in the very, very early years. And so CARE International, all these other international organizations went through the Rotary Club. And the reason that they went through that, because Rotary has such a stellar reputation that they knew that this was one place where corruption was not going to be accepted. And they knew that CARE International, all of these groups knew that the aid would get there. And I was so proud of that. And that the first Rotary Club president in Kabul was a woman. And the question was, well, why did they elect a woman? And they said, because the women are the only ones who don't have blood on their hands. And so your earlier question about diversifying, because the women were locked up in their basements like they are now. And so they couldn't have blood on their hands because they couldn't collaborate with the Taliban. And we went out, I didn't get to go to this, but all the Rotary clubs in the US pooled money and opened a new school for girls in the provinces out there. And there was a big ceremony. Government officials were there. American military leaders, generals were there to show this great new school for girls, so girls could finally go to school. All of these, people with stars on their shoulders and all of this. And there were Rotarians there. And there was a big to-do, and there was these Afghani women who were very quiet, some of them still wearing their coverings. And they went up to one of the American Rotary women who was there. And one of the women went up to her and said, "This is very lovely, but my daughter will never go to school here." And the Rotarian said, "Why not? We just spent all this money." And she said, "Well, we have no well in our village. And my daughter walks 3 hours each way to fetch water. And so there's no time for her to go to school here." But she could not go to the men, she could not go to the government officials, she could not go to American generals to tell that. But this mother loved her daughter so much that she screwed up the courage and approached an American woman to tell her this. So we sunk 3 wells at the school, and the girls were able to go to school. This is the importance of diversification. This is the importance of opening that pipeline and getting more people there at the table. Because you never know who's going to make the difference. Sometimes it's the club president, and sometimes it's the district governors and the PDGs, or sometimes it's the lone Rotary member who's there, who's a woman that looks like a mother, that someone can come up and say, "Please help me, this is the real problem." So, thank you, Rotary.
Thank you so